Hello, and welcome to the Sovereign Collective podcast, where we bring you real, raw truth for your self-empowerment. I'm your host, Sasha Calavoda, and I believe that you can stand on your own 2 feet, but that you don't have to do it alone. I love learning from people who continually strive to raise the bar, to go against mainstream thinking, and who dare to question the general consensus. People who risk being ridiculed or even risk the loss of their professional status as they bravely question the common narratives and challenge the rest of us to expand our minds and to reconsider what we think we already know. Join me in learning how to take control of your health and your mind so that you can have the energy to think more clearly and the confidence to step up and take responsibility for all aspects of your life. We promise to never censor here because I believe you are strong enough to hear the real, raw truth to make up your own mind. If you like what you find here at the Sovereign Collective podcast, then please share with your friends and family. I so appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. And now, on to the show. Hi, y'all. This is Sasha here for 2 quick announcements before we get on to our interview for today. First of all, if you are looking for quality supplements, quality tonic herbs, some specialty food items, and you're in and around Calgary, then please go check out Lotus Herbal Health, a great family-run store that has 2 locations in Calgary. You can find them at lotusherbalhealth.ca to find out where their locations are, or you can shop online and they will pretty much deliver anywhere. So quality supplements, tonic herbs, great staff. Check out lotusherbalhealth.ca. Secondly, I want to announce the relaunch of my program called Your Conscious Pregnancy and Parenting Guide, which consists of experts in their fields around the world on consciousness and parenting and education and nutrition and dentistry and homeopathy and more. This is a program I created after my son was born about 10 years ago, a little bit more than that. And I am now very concerned after the events of 2020 for our future generations. And I believe the time is now for conscious parenting and for conscious parents to rise up and to take back our pregnancies and our births and our parenting and the resilience of our children and of future generations. The time is now. We change the course of history by changing the course of our future generations. And we do that by consciously raising them, consciously birthing them, consciously conceiving them, feeding them good food, and taking back the responsibility of raising healthy, well-adjusted, robust people. Resilience. It's time to build resilience. So please go check out sovereigncollective.org/get the guide, and you will be able to check out all of the amazing material in there. It's time for us to understand how our worldviews are formed, how our self-views are formed, and how to impact that and how that impacts the society on a whole. So check it out, sovereigncollective.org/get the guide. And now on to the show. Hey everyone, Sasha here for Sovereign Collective podcast with another interview for you. Thanks for joining me today. Before we get started with my guest, I just want to mention my program on conscious pregnancy and parenting. I feel that our kids are in big trouble these days, and it's time for us to take back every single part of their lives, from the point of conception to our births, to our pregnancies, our births, educating them, feeding them, taking care of them. We need to take it all back. They are targeted. They are being groomed in schools. They are being confused. They are being taught inappropriate things and being led to confusion. And how do you control a person when they're afraid and when they're confused and they don't know what they stand for? So I really urge you to check out my program on conscious pregnancy and parenting. It is called Your Conscious Pregnancy and Parenting Guide. It's at thesovereigncollective.org if you look at the store tab, or sovereigncollective.org/get the guide. I've got amazing people in there. Kelly Brogan's in there, Dr. Bear Lando, Daniel Vitalis, David Wolf, Dr. Bruce Lipton. I'm going to be interviewing Sally Fallon soon. There's so many gems in there, experts in parenting and pregnancy and consciousness and conception and education and dentistry. Amazing resource. You won't find anything like it. So please check it out. Your kids are worth it, and you will never regret putting your resources and time and effort into your children. And with that, now on to our guest today. My guest today is Mike Donio, a former scientist. So we're going to find out why he's former soon, but first let's learn a little bit about him. So Mike Donio has a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology with a minor in chemistry, which is actually my degree was in chemistry, from the University of Massachusetts, and a master's in biotechnology from Johns Hopkins. He has 20 years of experience, including 15 years in biotech and the pharmaceutical industry. So he has a lot of history in a lot of interesting fields these days that are I don't know. They're not being very favorable to him now. We'll find out why. So Mike was fired from his most recent position at a biotech company in immuno-oncology, where he was a senior scientist developing antibodies to treat cancer. The whole cancer industry. I want to talk to you about the cancer industry as well, because that is surely an industry that is at risk if we actually find a cure, isn't it? And so why was he fired? He was fired for sticking to his morals and his strongly held religious beliefs and not capitulating to taking the poisonous genocidal injection in order to keep his job. Imagine that. There are too few people. I've been saying this from the very beginning. This only happens if people comply. And when you comply, you're complicit. You're complicit, whether you think so or know so or intend to be so. So too many people identify. I think this is a result of our major identifying of what's outside of us and what we do, and not truly knowing who we are. And if we take those things away from us, who are we? So we capitulate to things that we wouldn't do if we weren't forced to do. So I thank you, Mike, for joining me today. I thank you for holding strongly to your convictions and being a really great example for your children and your family and your colleagues. And hopefully you are an inspiration to them all to stand up and step out and say, no, this is not right on many, many fronts. So thank you for joining me today. I look forward to hearing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so grateful for every and any opportunity to speak out and hopefully encourage more people to do the same thing, because we really need more. The more voices that are willing to stand up and be heard, hopefully the louder those voices will be, and the greater the chance that people will start to take notice of what's kind of really going on. And that's how we shine a light on all this darkness that's consumed us these last few years.
And the darkness is darker than I would have ever thought. So, and you have dealt in, like, you have a history. You've also I didn't talk about all the fields that you've worked in, but you've worked in the area of HIV, and now you're in cancer. And these are some, there's some shady characters that keep coming up in these areas, now with this injection and HIV before and things like that. So let maybe talk about your story a little bit. So what happened? How was it that you let go? And are you trying to are you trying to get some remedy from your employer in any way? Where's the status of that right now?
Yeah, so I am in the process of considering options to fight back in, I guess, in a legal manner. And for that reason, I can't get too much into the specifics of how things went down at my former employer. And that's something that I hope will come to fruition, somewhat in the near future, as things continue to mount up, as evidence and data continues to mount up, showing how dangerous this experimental therapy is and has been, and the damage it's done over the last year plus. I hope the case will be continually strengthened, and so it's just a matter of kind of waiting till the time is right to do that. But that's definitely something that is on my radar, and I've got connected with a great attorney that's helping me out, and so definitely looking to fight back in multiple different ways.
Nice. And what was the response of your colleagues when you decided to not go ahead? And do you have any other colleagues that followed in your footsteps?
Yeah, unfortunately, the company that I came from was a very small biotech company in, so as you said, the immuno-oncology space. So this is, oncology is huge. Immuno-oncology is this kind of new, growing, hot area that's looking at therapies that are supposed to stimulate the immune system to attack cancer cells, is the idea. That's not entirely accurate, but that's the idea. So I was at a very small startup company that was clinical stage, but still a very small group. And unfortunately, even people that kind of were surprised by the extent to which they were pushing these things on people, still, I was the only one that actually, in the end, stood up and said no. And even after I was ultimately let go, people were surprised. They couldn't believe that they followed through on it. But I haven't heard of anybody else at my company that's done it. Now I've connected with and heard about scientists and people in the industry at other companies, big pharma companies that have said no and been terminated and things. So, I mean, there's definitely people that have pushed back throughout the industry because it's definitely become an industry-wide thing to push this on employees.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a worldwide thing. Really. I mean,
Yeah.
in Canada, I think we're the only country now that's not allowed to fly out of our country without getting it, which is insane.
Mm.
Never have we had such a deadly injection. The numbers are astronomical, and they're still pushing it right in front of your face. It's like it's like these are not the droids you're looking for, right? It's Star Wars. It's not happening, people, as another one just drops over and dies. So, have you had any colleagues that have had negative repercussions as a result of getting it?
In terms of
Health,
adverse effects,
yeah,
or
adverse effects, anything like that? Do you know of anyone personally?
yeah, I mean, there were people that I worked with because most of them obviously they got it and they got it almost as soon as it was available. And nobody there, I don't think, had, let's say, incredibly serious reactions like you're hearing, but definitely significant reactions. And I've heard about people, friends, family members, and things that have had very significant reactions to it. I mean, I think a lot of people probably have if you think about it enough, or if you might not initially realize that the person had the thing or not, but I think more people than not probably know somebody or that have been impacted by it for sure.
So, my question is, like, but what has happened to critical thinking in the science space? What has happened to the capacity for logic and reason and spotting fallacies? And if it is true that, for example, in the field of creating this injection, that it really, I have a feeling it started much earlier than they say it did. But regardless, knowing what's out there in the news and knowing that we have no long-term study on anything, like I would never consider it regardless of the studies,
Mm-hmm.
but what has happened to the scientist's capacity to logic that out and to understand that this is not a good idea for your children, for a pregnant woman, for anybody? Like, where is the critical thinking?
Yeah, it's seemingly gone. Everybody is, especially in science, but clearly outside of science, is very much struck and stuck on new technologies, right? I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that have been interested or taken the thing just because, oh, it's a new technology, it's a new kind of therapeutic intervention, thing that's out there, so they just wanted to do it. There's just a fixation inside industry too on new kinds of technologies, and out of that an over reliance on the information that you're getting from those technologies, and then you're still leaning on a lot of faulty assumptions, and in the end of the day nobody really wants to ask the difficult questions and come up with the proof that these things are real or meaningful, and you just keep moving along. And I mean, so much of this the last couple of years is just bred out of fear, right? And you just stop thinking rationally when you're trapped in a cycle of fear. And scientists believe that all of the same things that people are being told about the science. Most scientists believe these things. It's belief more than anything else, because all you have to do is search and look at the evidence to find out what there is or isn't proof of. But it comes down largely to just belief and an inability to ask questions, which I think derives from how people are trained and educated, which of course starts at a young age. You look at what has happened to the education of our kids. I have 3 young kids, and I'm terrified when I see their curriculum and how it's changing and the things that they're being taught or not taught, or, you know, and you can clearly see, if you follow that out, how you then get to a point later in life that you're more accepting of other things as you advance in your education. And then next thing you know, you find yourself as a scientist at a lab bench, and you've just accepted everything that everybody's told you along the way and never questioned anything. And so, therefore, why start now, right? And you just work off of that and keep building on top of that until you create a monster, so to speak, right?
It sounds pretty unscientific to me. I don't know if you could be more unscientific.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, but that's the thing. I think it's a matter of grooming. And just as a side note, have you ever considered pulling your kids or looking for some alternative or not subjecting them to the system?
Yeah, I mean, my kids aren't in public schools. That's for sure. And we had them in a private school, but it turned out that even that school, due to the kinds of funding they were accepting, their curriculum was getting influenced by things like the Department of Education and other things. And so their curriculums are shifting. So we're now looking to find other solutions where there won't be that influence. And I'm guessing eventually I'm going to run out of real estate on that and wind up having to just pull them all together. But I think as parents have to, if you haven't already, you need to take a leading role in understanding what your kids are up against these days, because it's incredible.
It's horrifying. I even just saw here in Alberta recently some of the curriculum in the sex education, and it was like porn, normalizing porn, and it's just beyond just the whole gender thing, but normalizing pornography and saying that it's okay. Like, this is not okay. This is child abuse. This is evil. And yeah, so I have a 13-year-old boy. He was never been to school ever. Very intentionally. Very thankful that that was the
Good for you.
yeah. No, I've been on this path for a long time. So when did you start questioning things? I know you said it in another interview you've listened to that you've been questioning for a long time, but was there some kind of a pivotal moment that made you think, wait, something's not right here? Or is this just your general nature?
I've always been somewhat of a skeptic. Even as a kid, I was the kid that never shut up and never stopped asking questions, and I guess that translated right on through as I decided I wanted to be a scientist for some crazy reason, and then continued to ask questions because I thought that's what scientists were supposed to do, and continually was confronted by things that just didn't make sense, didn't add up. I mean, it started right, I guess, at my first job out of my undergrad work, which was in an HIV lab, and I was confronted with things that didn't make sense about how viruses and HIV were supposed to work, and dug into that, and basically have kept asking questions ever since. And there were some significant events that occurred on the way that really opened my eyes further. I mean, obviously, the whole COVID thing really kind of sealed the door and kind of affirmed a lot of my suspicions and questions for so many years. But I mean, even before that, I was really starting to question a lot about the medical system, about the industry, about. So it's been kind of a long time coming, little by little. Yeah.
So how was it for you to go to work every day? Wasn't there a little bit of misalignment in what you were doing daily and what your true values were, or how did that work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess naively, I thought that I could just kind of be a thorn in everybody's side and ask questions and push back and poke and prod and maybe try to convince some people that we needed to do something different. Clearly, I was out of alignment with something there because that didn't work out so well. But I certainly tried. I certainly asked a lot of questions in my day-to-day work of all different people, whether it was my colleagues all the way up through my boss's senior leadership. Um, most people didn't want to entertain it. Probably cost me opportunities. Oh well, I didn't. My main concern was always, is there a way I can operate, I guess, in this system and try to get to the truth, try to find a way to do real science in this system. And when push came to shove, it doesn't seem like there's a way to make that happen anymore. And look what's happened. I mean, anybody that has questioned and stood up and pushed back against these mandates and things, they're gone now. Kind of selected out anybody that questioned in a way.
And have you received any threats or ultimatums or anything like that for you speaking out?
Thank God, no, not yet. But, I'm certainly aware of the potential and the dangers associated with speaking out. I'm sure there's been a lot of people in comments to interviews and things that I've done that have had different opinions of things I've said. And, my search is for the truth, and I try my best to walk boldly in that truth, but keep an open mind as well. And so I'll always respond with what I believe to be the truth, but at the same time, if somebody presents information contrary to that, I'm happy to entertain it, and I'm happy to change my mind. But I'm going to stand firm in what I believe to be the truth, and I'm not going to be swayed by what somebody says or thinks about me.
Big bullies. There's big bullies out there. Well, that sounds very scientific of you to follow the truth and be open to that being challenged. I mean, I think that's really truly where true science lies. So in your years, have you seen, I don't know how anyone can conduct any true science when it's being funded by big pharma or whatever tech firm or whatever. And obviously the desired result and outcome is what's going to give you more money and give you more support. So how is it even possible to do any kind of untainted science out there? And we're living in a time when, journal articles from these well-known journals that are, esteemed journals that have been, they're retracting articles, and they're clearly publishing fake science. This word science, follow the, and when is the science? Like, isn't science, how scientific is it to even say the science? Like, whose science? Why is that the only one that I get to support when there's all this other evidence over here? So how does one even conduct an honest research program in light of where the money's coming from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the influence of money is such a strong barrier to doing meaningful science, because if you don't do what whoever is providing the money wants you to do, you're not going to get the money. But on the other hand, even if for some reason you did get funding and then you decided to go off and do something else, that work would never see the light of day, because you'd never get published by any journal of influence, right? Because there's kind of gatekeepers on both ends of the spectrum, if you will. And there's examples. If you look at different diseases and things where once a certain causative agent was identified, you couldn't do research to look at anything else. Then all the money going in any other direction was dried up. If you write a grant proposal wanting to look at something that didn't line up with whatever is the established causative agent or whatever, you're not going to get funded. It's not going to get approved. So you literally just can't do the research in that manner. You'd have to find other ways. And I think that's part of this, is getting people to not just speak out, but to put their heads together to figure out, how can we do science, real science, outside of this system in a kind of decentralized manner, but we've got to, but if you're working with outside of the system, you've got to find ways, sources to gain all those things that you would need to do the science, the funding, the infrastructure, the tools and things. But I do think science is valuable still, even though we've seen how it can mislead people. At its very nature, science is derived from the Latin term scientia, that it literally means knowledge, and it's knowledge of our world around us, and it's derived through experimentation and observation. And we forget that it really is just about knowledge. And so when we yield to experts and we decide we don't want to put in the effort to do this ourselves, I'm not suggesting that everybody build a lab in their house and do their own research, but just doing research, building to an expert, we give up that knowledge, we give up that power. And, so I think that there's a lot of value in that, in understanding the world within us and around us. And there's different ways to do that. We've been led astray by a lot of the things that we believe are science. And there should be other better ways to get to do real, pure science in a rigorous and honest manner. But it's going to take work, because you can't get what you need to ask real questions in the current system. You'll get cut off if you try to go down a path that's not supported by the mainstream. Unfortunately, it's a sad state of affairs that with something like science, that you're supposed to be able to ask lots of questions. It's supposed to be an iterative process. It's supposed to have a high bar to get to a point where you can say that you've verified or validated anything. Yet you're limited by what you can the questions you can ask if you're looking to operate in the system, right? So yeah, it's a difficult situation we find ourselves in science these days. That's for sure.
And I think like anything right now, we want to continue living in a free manner, without under the chains of any oppressive regime, and really in search of truth and knowledge, and just living in a way that we feel is right for ourselves without permission from anyone else. We have to create these parallel societies, right? So I think this is where our creativity is going to be becoming more and more important. When there's a problem, there's always a solution. So that's the thing, we have to organize together and come up with some creative solutions to these issues, because the whole healthcare system, I mean, we know it's not serving us. It's not serving us. The science, that word, serving us, like none of this is serving us. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of new systems emerge in the coming years.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that. So is that something that you are working towards with anyone right now, is to create any new system?
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking to different people that I've connected with. An incredible number of people. I can't even explain it. Just incredibly good people that are just in search of the same kind of truths that I am, and trying to find solutions. And so there are a lot of people that are thinking about these things, and that really want to try to build out these new parallel decentralized systems that see value in doing a lot of these things, but understand the flaws of the current system. And so there are definitely discussions, but I think we still need more people. The more kind of different viewpoints, different experiences that people bring to the table can only strengthen the process, because it's not just about tearing down the old system. We have to learn from the old system and kind of think about, well, what can or should we incorporate from that system, but what also, it's probably a lot we want to leave behind. But so the more people that have the different kinds of viewpoints, so not just scientists either. I mean,
right.
I don't want to make it sound like I'm just saying we need scientists or we need doctors or we need this. We need people all shapes and sizes. I've connected with a lot of great people who have just out of curiosity or whatever have started to do their own research. And I think it's awesome to see people just roll up their sleeves and dig in because they want to get to the truth of it. They want to see for themselves what is the data really saying? Is there really data to support some of these notions that have been presented to us that have been used to put forth all of these tyrannies that we've been subjected to these last few years? And so they've done their own research, and it's amazing. So there's lots of different kinds of people that are coming together to ask these questions and to start thinking about new systems.
One of the beautiful gifts, I think, of the last 2 years is you're finding these people that you may not have ever gotten to know had you not gone through what you're going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
And considering, in light of how research is conducted, what's the general validity of most of the studies out there?
Yeah, well, from my own experience, I'd say the great majority are certainly lacking in their potential to be verified as being true. But there's a lot of other people that have, explored this and asked this question. Going back to the early 2000s, there was actually some formal studies conducted, and they coined the term reproducibility crisis because there was such an issue with being able to reproduce data. So the whole thing is when you publish data, when it's peer reviewed, there's no component of that peer review process whereby the reviewer, regardless of what journal you're talking about, whether it's the most prestigious one, quote unquote, like Science, Nature, or all the way down to, whatever, that they can verify or that they do attempt to verify the validity of the data that you're presenting to them to publish. So they're judging it on various merits and biases and different things, but nobody ever checks. They just assume that you've done the work. You've done the number of replicate experiments. You've done the stuff to ensure that the data you're putting forth is valid. That's not something that's ever explored. So the whole idea is you're putting it out into the public domain, and other labs, other groups should be able to test that to see if what you're claiming holds up, especially if it's something that's of value and importance and you're saying that this should be used to develop a new therapy or something like that. Then it should be tested. So what happens is these companies and other people, I've done it, you try to replicate the study, the data, and you can't come up with the same thing. You do it exactly the same way that they're outlining it in the paper, and sometimes you do what you think you need to do to kind of optimize things even a little bit. Doesn't work out. Well, I don't know. I see that as a big problem. A lot of scientists understand that this is something that's an issue, but the problem is they don't see why it means that the system is flawed or why the data is invalid or that it's as big of a deal as I think it really is. I mean, it highlights a potentially glaring issue in modern scientific research if most of published findings are in fact false and are, as one author said, is maybe they're just measures of the prevailing bias. There's so many influences that are put on scientists that are just bred out of the system itself that it's hard to believe that you can do an independent experiment and not impart anything on it that's going to change it. So that only adds to the problem, right? You can only do certain things, and then even when you do, there's so many influences that it winds up, it's a good likelihood that your finding isn't even true anyway.
Right. So interesting. So, a question that I wanted to build on. So, are there not protocols that one must follow to be able to publish? Is there, there's the whole scientific method that we talk about, but I mean, is there really a scientific method? How valid is that? What you would think that there'd be some basic protocols to ensure, and then conflicts of interest, like all over the place, but are there not basic protocols?
Yeah, I mean, the scientific method, I don't know if people just aren't taught what it truly is or how to apply it, perhaps, but you just don't see it used either at all or not very effectively these days. But that's supposed to be kind of the framework of how you come up with an idea, you derive a testable hypothesis, and then you design your experiment, which is supposed to have all the controls and rigor, and you state all the assumptions that you're making, and you do the experiment, and you see if you're able to verify the hypothesis. Many times, most of the time, you shouldn't, because there should be a really high bar to get to a point where you say you verified it. And that really is, science should be an iterative, a repetitive process where you're constantly fine-tuning things and going back and redesigning experiments, testing something else. But we've gotten away from that. We've gotten to a point where because of these conflicts of interest, biases, there's so much pressure to deliver, especially in fields like virology, oncology. There's so much pressure to deliver competition that you skip these important steps, especially going back and verifying your findings. If you get what you think you should get, if you get what somebody else wants you to get that's providing you the money or whatever, you just say, okay, and you run with it. Instead of really following that scientific method. I mean, and then you go a step further, and even within experiments, there should be, in theory, more standardized ways of doing certain things. But what you find in a lot of labs is scientists are kind of just left to their own devices. And that in itself, as noted in some of these essays about this whole lack of reproducibility, is one of the sources of error that can arise when you have scientists all kind of doing their own things and designing experiments and following different protocols. It just invariably introduces more error and increases the probability that a given set of data, a given finding is false. So it's more of kind of the system breeding, less rigorous activity, unfortunately.
Were you ever urged to come up with a specific result, or subtly guided to come up with a specific result in your research?
Yeah, I mean, you're asked to, maybe it's more generate data in support of XYZ, where again, you're designing an experiment or optimizing a particular assay with the intention of deriving a specific outcome. It's not at all independent, or you're clearly influencing the system, and you can easily influence a lot of things, tweak conditions, and significantly affect the outcomes in a lot of these cases. And you're already, in most laboratory settings, with what's called in vitro, where you're doing testing in a lab, in a dish, in a tube, or whatever. It's already extremely contrived artificial systems that don't really have much translatability to an intact living human being anyway. So, I mean, it's a really unfortunate situation that I think a lot of scientists find them in. I mean, I've seen people actually ask a boss or a higher up, well, what do you want us to show?
Wow.
That kind of thing. Or I've heard stories about people that do stuff like that, I mean, because that's, it's who has the money. You look to, well, what are the investors? You get questions from investors that get funneled down through senior leadership that wind up on to the scientists. And you say, well, this investor has this question, so can you guys figure out a way to, answer it? But, if you can show it if you cannot refute everything we've already told them, that would be good too. So there's a lot of games that are played in that way. It happens a lot in industry. And I think the thing is that in the bigger companies, you're much more siloed. So maybe it's less apparent, but a smaller company, you can't help but see this stuff because it's right there. You have so much more visibility to everything all the way up to the top. You're interacting with, investors, senior leadership, CEO, chief scientific officer, etc. It's not just your manager, other scientists. You can see all these things. They're all interacting with you and making requests of different scientists for different things. And I've seen lots of different things that would maybe range from negligence to potentially fraud. There's a lot of things that a lot of companies, a lot of scientists do that's just at a minimal extent, dishonest, if not a lot worse, because you're talking about the lives of patients. These things directly influence clinical trials, where you're doing experimental testing on patients that are, and many times, very sick, and you're designing those trials or getting approval for a trial based on data that's not been proven out. And again, it comes down to the pressure to follow through on, when you have a private company with private investors, to follow through on that and generate wealth, or whatever. There's just so much pressure. Especially now with viruses and anything related to coronavirus, it's hard to believe that anything coming out of that wouldn't be strongly influenced by that competition and pressure. I've seen so many papers and things come out that have been clearly rushed out, even where people will comment on them, because so much is in the open source now with that work, and the authors will even come back and agree to the refutation. They'll say, yeah, we had to rush this out because of the nature of it. And I agree, we can't really, these claims are kind of unfounded because we did have to rush, and maybe we can't really make the statements with what we found being that specific to COVID because we didn't really do all the work necessary to get it done, So if you dig enough, you can, yeah.
Yeah, what is the point? And so, so the viral industry, the cancer industry, so I'm assuming as you connect with some of the people that you've connected with, I know you're on AlphaCast and What Really Makes You Build, co-author, your whole paradigm around health, viruses, cancer must be being strongly challenged right now, I would think. If you're open to the opinions of other people and the evidence of other scientists out there. I can't imagine that must be going through a huge paradigm shift for you.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I guess part of it is having developed drugs for a long period of time and knowing and seeing firsthand how toxic these things are. I've never been a huge advocate, as surprising it might seem for someone who's in the industry for so long, of the use of pharmaceutical drugs, just for that reason alone, because I know how toxic they are, and I know that there really is no such thing as a targeted specific drug and the side effects and all this stuff, that so much of it is just how it's been messaged to market these things. So I had a little element of that coming in, but I've learned so much, and I'm still learning so much from a lot of these people that I've connected with, and these different voices in the kind of health freedom community that are willing to look at alternative strategies and largely just ways to leverage what the body does. We so quickly want to go to someone in a white coat that gives us some pill to stop whatever symptom we're having before we even think about, why are we having this symptom? Is it actually benefiting us to have this symptom? Is it part of a healing process or something?
Yeah.
I mean, what I realized was so much of my work that I was doing when developing these drugs was just coming up with band-aids to suppress symptoms, never actually getting to the underlying thing that was going awry. When you look at people's lifestyles and things these days, it's no wonder that people would have a lot of different symptoms and things going awry as their bodies are continuously trying to adapt and detox and all these different things in response to what they're being bombarded with. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a bit of a paradigm shift. But I guess I would say that I had an open mind going into it because of seeing kind of how dangerous the world that I was in was, um, and having family members that had been affected by it, also kind of opened my eyes to the dangers of the current medical system.
Right, your
Well,
father recently passed.
yeah, I lost my dad about 3 years ago to pancreatic cancer, and about a month after he was diagnosed. And
Wow.
I was appalled, would be probably putting it kind of nicely, about at the treatment, the quality of treatment and everything that he received. And um, the more, I mean, I unfortunately have had a lot of friends and family members that, and I think everybody, it's one of those diseases that seems to affect everybody pretty proportionately, unfortunately. Um, and so I knew how deadly the drugs were. I knew how, some difficult the treatments and therapies, but I hadn't been upfront face to face with the intricacies of how things were handled and everything, and how the focus is on certain elements of the treatment process while other things are completely ignored, or it just kind of blew me away. And that was definitely a very eye-opening experience that strengthened my questioning for sure.
Right. Well, and being in the field of cancer research, are you aware of all? Well, first of all, you spoke with Dr. Orlando. He will tell you that cancer is not a disease, right? If you're familiar with German new medicine, you will know that that is a conflict shock adaptation to help you get through the adaptations, to help you get through the shock. And then there's numerous. Are you aware of the numerous amounts of other natural remedies for it out there? Like, is that something that you've looked into before? Are you aware of it? Like, and the suppression and the witch hunts that people have to endure when they do have something? Because really, you are part of the system. What would that do to that industry, the cancer industry, if we were to actually stop cancer? I mean, really, considering the infrastructure, the studies, the doctors, the machinery, the medicine, the everything. I mean, do you think they want you to find that cure?
Right. Yeah, no, people like Dr. Lando are amazing. Just doing incredible work, and the way that he thinks about things like cancer and stuff like that, it's just really enlightening. And I think it supported. So again, as I was learning both in my studies, graduate studies and things, and at the bench about cancer, even that didn't add up. The way that you're taught what cancer is and how it arises, and what the current, I guess, accepted theory, just like everything else, there's a current accepted thing, and it never sat well with me. But as I explored more into what from the materials that I have, to what does this cancer look like, I started to make associations with other things, and I've done a lot. I'm continuing to do a lot more research, looking at things like what Dr. Lando and others are saying, and I think what's coming out of German New Medicine is extremely interesting and very relevant and makes a lot of sense. But just from what I was seeing a lot that paralleled healing processes. There's a lot with cancers and tumors that really parallel wound healing processes. And I thought, well, isn't this amazing? And anytime you see it come up, the other thing that's interesting is anytime you see it come up in the literature or anything, it's always cautioned that, is cancer a wound healing? You bring it up, but then you couch it by saying, well, it just looks like it. It's not really that, right? No, it can't possibly be part of the body's own healing mechanisms. Maybe it's just coincidental that it kind of looks like it, right? So the more I kind of started to look into that and see that, it really kind of cemented to me that this is not, again, what we're being told, and the ways in which they're claiming that cancer arises. I started saying, well, how do you know that these things aren't, some of these things that they're saying that are defining how cancer arises aren't just kind of, either they don't matter, or they're an after effect of all of this stuff that's going on that the cancer is doing. Yet we want to look at it because there's this over fixation on genomics right now. So everything's got to be about this mutation, that mutation, and so there's such an over reliance on that's got to be what the key is. But nobody ever thinks, like, do we have the order right, or is this really how this is arising, or is this really what's, again, it's in the world that I was in, it was pretty settled science. Nobody could ask a question about that. And that's one of the things I love about the people that I've connected with. Everybody's asking all these different questions, and nobody's exactly coming up with the same exact answers, but hopefully together, if we're all focusing on getting to some kind of truth about this, we'll all put our heads together and the different researches, different viewpoints, different approaches, and maybe come to something approximating, I don't know, the truth, but just something that makes a lot more sense than what we've been told for sure, and that might drive us towards meaningful. I mean, you already said there absolutely are things that I guess could be defined as cures that have definitely incredibly effective ways of treating it that the pharmaceutical industry certainly isn't going to tell you about, because let's not forget, pharmaceutical, biotech, it's profiting off of innovation. You are a customer. You're not just a patient, right? So that means if you're a customer, then you're also part of a target market. And they also want a return customer, right? It's a business. You hate to think of it like that because they do such a good job marketing themselves to make you think that they're putting the patients first, that that's where their interest lies. But if they truly were about cures and health, they'd run out of customers. Their profit margins would dry up. So
you seem to have record numbers of customers these days. I would say quite contrary. Yeah, and so have you ever thought of maybe teaming up with a natural health practitioner and doing research in that, like using your skill set for truth? And because there definitely are some amazing natural health practitioners out there and natural researchers out there. I don't know how they get their funding, really, I don't. But how do you see yourself teaming up in that way and continue down the research path?
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to be able to do that, and I've connected with a few people, and there's been some work that's been done by crowdfunding money to do it, and so I think that's a possibility for some things. But again, it factors back into if there's a desire, if we want to create kind of a new decentralized system, are there different ways that we can look at funding, for example? And actually, Dr. Lando and Mike Winner especially is doing some work on a lot of a new decentralized system to potentially address some of those kind of questions and needs. So I think we're going to see a lot of new solutions to these problems come out in the near future. They're already starting to come out that hopefully will enable more collaboration, more research, and to be able to ask these kinds of questions outside of the system. And so I'm very much open to that. I'd love to be able to actually put my skills and experience to good use for once and not.
And how maybe the body can go right and not how it can go wrong, perhaps. And also, like, it's so ridiculous. I just tell people all the time, if we would just step back and, like, generally the answers to our problems are not that difficult. Stop poisoning the water, the air, the soil, stop poisoning, and like everything is fake, and return to nature. Return to nature. And look at and looking at the emotional, like, I mean, look at the emotional climate of the general population, especially over the last 2 years, never mind what it's been going towards, right? So, I mean, there's so many opportunities to explore. Imagine having a lab like Dr. Orlando doing all these other interesting things, bringing in frequencies and resonance and, shapes and numbers and all these things. It's such an amazing, interesting field. Yeah, imagine if everybody was putting their energies towards that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So you've got your S4HF in the background. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it stands for Scientists for Health Freedom. So when I was let go, I immediately wanted to try to connect with other scientists that were in this same situation. And so I said, is there a community, a resource where scientists are connecting, or people that were interested in talking about science and asking these difficult questions? And I couldn't really find any good spaces. And so I just said, I'll create one. So I created this community, and I say I basically kind of planted the seed, and it's kind of organically grown, and we're at a couple hundred people. I started it on Telegram, and have now expanded to a couple different places, and am looking to continue to expand as I consider different ways to support people, encourage and support people that are willing to stand up and speak out. So it's about having a community that, a place that scientists and anybody, again, not just scientists, can come and gather and explore these things and ask difficult questions, have rational debates without, being chastised for things or being poked, open, honest debate, and also hopefully encourage people to speak up. And I know it's not easy. I know there's lots of things that keep people from speaking out, and hopefully we can at least overcome some of those barriers. I know at the end of the day, some people just might not want to have a spotlight cast on you, right? So, but maybe there's ways we can work around that too. So I want to come up with, or not come up with, but I'm coming up with ideas of ways to promote people that are willing to speak out. So having discussions with scientists and other kinds of people, to make sure that anybody that wants to speak out, that your voice is able to be heard, to build a platform for that, but also to provide support in other ways. I mean, people that want to speak out, if you're still on the inside, well, then you're going to be risking your job, your livelihood. If you've got a family to support or whatever, then we need to come up with a way to help you, support you, so that, if you're putting yourself at that risk, so financially. And that's where then these different ideas, similar to how do we fund, lab work and experiments, we need to think of new ways to fundraise and support people that are willing to put themselves at risk and speak out. So that's definitely part of this too. But it's largely a space for people that are willing to question the science, right? And to support those that are. And I really hope I can encourage more too, because we've got a great number of people that have come out, and I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing. But I think the more that are willing to stand up and speak out, and the more that are willing to put their heads together to think about what's next, we can only benefit from that. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about what we do here and now and what kind of solutions we're able to come up with now. They've got to last into the future. I want a lasting solution that can ensure that my kids, their kids, I'm not even anticipating seeing necessarily a time where we say, okay, we've succeeded, because the idea is we're planting seeds for generations down the road to have a fighting chance.
And that's what we have to keep in mind, is these future generations. I mean, if we were to just follow the plan for this next generation, we're going to have nothing left. There will be no grandchildren for us, right? I don't know, your kids are young, my son's only 13. Like, there will be no grandchildren if we were to just follow the rules and follow along. There'll be no natural reproduction, no natural food production, no robust mental and physical health. That's what we need to do, is think about those generations. Think about your great grandparents and what did they do for children? What do the tribes do? What do the natural people do for they always have the future generations in mind. We have our next meal in mind. And that's it, right? We don't even think about that. It's just mind blowing. So what would you say to someone who says, trust the science?
Well, clearly I'd say don't trust the science. And if nothing else, because we have to be empowered to gain this knowledge ourselves. I mean, if nothing else, you see how much has been thrown at us that is questionable, and what that can do when we willfully accept it. So, if nothing else, use a lot of discernment and, empower yourself by asking questions, by not just trusting what somebody else or some entity is presenting to you. Verify it yourself before you are willing to give up precious freedoms, and understand how much power you do have, that you don't need to be afraid. And really, so much of what we accepted over the last 2+ years really was entirely dependent on us acquiescing to it. And if we would have just said no at any given time, we could have unraveled the whole thing. I mean, I found out locally where I live that the county was trying to impose these mask mandates and things. And somebody eventually asked the question, is there actually any kind of enforcement mechanism behind all this? And they had to admit that there wasn't, that it was really dependent on the private businesses to enforce it. And once that came to light, well, all the businesses said, we don't want to be on the hook for this. So it fell apart. And we said, well, okay, well, then this really isn't a real thing, because it's entirely dependent on us just doing it, adhering to it.
That's the thing.
Behind it.
Yes, it depends on our voluntary compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scary thing, is that the businesses and the people will ensure compliance of the others. So we're living in times where, you have to be concerned about your neighbor is going to say about you if they see you not following the rules. So that's interesting. So was there a strong push against mask mandates where you are?
Yeah. I mean, maybe not as much as I would have hoped. I live in a state that was there was no statewide mandates or anything of that nature. It just happened to be in the county that I live, because it's close proximity to a big city. There's a lot of, outside influences and things, but largely the state was, pretty free. It just happened to be where the county that I lived in, we had people in charge that really wanted to push these mandates and things. But fortunately, there were a lot of parents and business owners that were negatively affected and just said, we've had enough, and pushed back. And eventually we were, they cast enough light on it and showed what it is. And there was a big kind of landmark court case that stripped the health departments of a lot of power. But ultimately, it just came down to the realization that it was us all along, us agreeing to it was what kept it going. And if people, there was never going to be this thing of if you just do it, then they'll let you have that power back, or they'll let you, they'll release. We agreed to it. We needed to realize that we were the ones that were kind of policing ourselves with it in the way, and all we needed to do was say no. And it was kind of funny because once that occurred to people, then everybody kind of stopped, at least the majority of the people kind of stopped doing it. But, while it was unsure, a lot of people just kind of went along to get along, kind of.
Yes.
I said, and made my kids clear on what was going on, but there were a lot of people that I think they just were caught in the middle and didn't know how to react and just went along with it, unfortunately. But once they saw, oh, this really isn't a thing that we need to, okay, fine, And I hope I hope people are aware of this stuff now more and won't let it happen again, because don't think for half a second that this is the end.
Oh, goodness. No.
As you know.
No, and
you
you're
are.
in Missouri? Is that where you are?
I'm sorry?
Are you in Missouri?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember. And so how many states, because we have still, it's alarming how many people here are still masked up, driving by themselves with a mask on, walking with a mask on. It is alarming. I can't even believe my eyes. So how many states actually never really had a statewide mask mandate? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but there was a good number that never actually, maybe 20 or.
That's huge.
Yeah, I mean.
People don't even, I remember seeing a meme, well, not a meme, just a picture of someone saying, not afraid, just, what did it say, just educated. And that's what they're wearing on their mask, right? Like, just educated. It's like, yeah, okay, no. So, yeah, that's the thing, people, we're not getting close to the end. They are not stopping, the pressure's not stopping the rules and regulations, and they kind of back off and then ramp it up and back it off, and this is how they break people down, right?
Yeah.
They do.
They say they're giving you a break, right?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, none of the mechanisms that allowed them to push this stuff in the first place have been repealed or undone or anything like that. They've just relaxed it.
Right.
Of course, none of it was real in the first place. We always had the power to just say no. I mean, what are they going to do? Arrest, couple 100,000 people where, in the county that I live, or there's 1 million people in the county, whatever. I mean, if half of them say no, you're going to arrest us all? I mean, no.
That's the whole point. And that's why I'm so shocked by the compliance, by the doctors. Like I just have no respect for these people. They see what's happening. You have to choose to decide to not go down that path at this point in time. And
right.
Numbers, we have the power in our numbers. There are many more people, many of us, rather than the rule makers out there. So, yeah. So where do you see the future of your field now as it is? Do you see it growing and sustaining itself? Do you see it falling apart and the truth rearing its ugly head and falling? Like, where do you see that going?
Yeah, I assume you're talking about the field that I was in.
Yeah, the field of science in general, and research and mainstream and big pharma. And is there longevity to it at this point in time?
Well, it's certainly seeing quite a boom over the last couple of years with the whole coronavirus thing. I mean, every company that has any potential applicability of the work they do to attempt to pretend that they can do something to address the quote-unquote virus has certainly tried. I mean, there were even people at the company that I used to be at that said, hey, we develop antibodies. Maybe we should be doing something to try to contribute to this whole thing and, and get some money and stuff, develop some drugs or tools out of it. And that's how we can kind of, break into that and carve off a piece for ourselves. I mean, everybody's looking at it as a way to, to make something. And so for now, it's below, it's kind of increasing in response to that. I think there's been, new companies and things that have spawned out of it. But I don't know if it'll truly. I mean, I think the more that we shine light on the truth of this and just how ridiculous a lot of the science has been that's driven all of this, hopefully that'll put a damper on what's gone on. But I think they're going to do what they do. I mean, they are, especially pharma. I mean, they control so much, and they're so seemingly self-sustaining. There's such big entities. I don't see much stopping them at this point. So I think they're going to keep trying to grow, keep trying to, do different things and come up with different things to make people believe they need to keep using their products. And certainly they gained a whole new group of people that are going to be dependent on their products for a long time unless they shift their paradigms. That's for sure.
And so you said, I remember hearing you said in another podcast that you did your research into the shot, and that's why you didn't take it. So are your colleagues not doing the same kind of research? What did your research findings show you? And so so you did it more because of the shot itself, or did you do it more because of your religious beliefs, or was it a combination?
It was definitely a combination. I wanted to know, my religious beliefs and my gut were telling me strong things against it, but I knew I had the ability as a scientist to ask questions, to really investigate it for myself, to see, is there any validity to this? Does it actually warrant anybody actually testing it, or is it really just a complete box of unknowns that is much more likely to harm people than do anything of any kind of benefit? So I investigated some of the companies that were doing it and said, what's the history behind this technology? The idea behind it, it kind of spawned from it's a gene therapy at the heart of it. I hate the word therapy is so weird because it makes you think you're doing something good to treat somebody, but
Right.
that's a misnomer. But
yes.
Gene therapy, the whole reason for the advent, the development of this new technology with respect to mRNA and stuff is because of what an unmitigated disaster gene therapy had been up until that point. Almost every time it's been attempted to be used in its original kind of manifestation, it's been a disaster. You've had a lot of deaths. You've had a lot of people that have gotten cancers and things, and it's just been a disaster. So they tried to come up with another way based on different people's research into how you manipulate these mRNAs. But I had done a lot of research and a lot of utilized different kinds of techniques similar to that to generate tools that I've used for study in the lab, generating recombinant cell lines that express different proteins and things using similar strategies. So I kind of knew what they were attempting to do. And that in itself, I was kind of like, well, I don't really think I want that we need to be doing that in a human for starters. But even if we thought it was a good idea, can we really do this in a safe manner? Is what they're proposing, how they're doing this, safe at all? Can we really believe that it's not going to, be significantly disruptive and da-da-da? And so, I just dug into it as best I could with what evidence was available, and I couldn't find anything that suggested to me that it was safe or that we really knew what was going to happen, because it was so new. This technology was originally tested not as a vaccine, obviously, and it was tested in cancer and I think some other rare diseases. And it was a disaster. It was incredibly, at dosages where it should have been required to be quote unquote therapeutic, it was incredibly toxic. And then when you dose down to where you could get a safety window, it wasn't effective at all at anything. If it was in the first place, who knows? But
Right.
so that's part of the whole thing with this, is it was something that had a tremendous amount of promise that companies raised an incredible amount of money, but could never deliver on it because it kept failing. So they needed something else to generate interest in it, and they kind of repurposed it, and voila. There you go, vaccine.
And what shocks me is the fact of how few people question the need for such a mass inoculation campaign in the first place, considering what the death rates for 2020 were relative to past years, clearly showing that there is no pandemic, people, that we are, I mean, other than I think some excess poisoning happening in some pockets, there's nothing of the sort going on, which is just, it blows me. It's like, okay, we're not even talking about the fact that what is this push in the first place, this crazy push, not questioning that it's everywhere, right? And then what I thought would really stop the whole campaign is when it got to the kids. And
I thought for sure.
Yeah, I cannot believe how willing people are to put their children forth as guinea pigs just so they can move on with their normal lives and not be questioned, not be judged by other people, to be able to play their sports or whatever, and just that is the really sad part of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking as a parent. I mean, I can't even imagine trying to justify that in any way. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But it shows you what fear can do.
Right.
This
is how you govern a people. You get
right.
You get them confused and you get them scared, and then it's easy. And any tyrannical leader knows this.
And we all had kind of a vision of what we thought, based on what Hollywood and stuff told us that what a pandemic should look like. So then when those terms are thrown around, those things are, it evokes a certain response, and you think, oh, well, this is what it's got to be, without actually looking at reality. Are people actually dropping dead in the streets? Are people actually,
Right. It's like, how about you turn off the TV and let your experience inform your decision and your opinions, not what you're being told to think, right? And Hollywood, that's funny that you bring that, now that you bring that, that also, they play a huge role in shaping our opinions and our ideas of the world as well. Big role in that. Yeah, well, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to add? I think I've covered all the things that I was curious about. What is there any other messages that you want to share with my audience before we go today?
Just that I'm so appreciative of you having me on, and it's been great to discuss this stuff with you and have a chance to hopefully shed some more light on all of this, on the current and unfortunate state of science. And I hope that people will realize that it can be a lot more approachable, and there's so much about it that's been kind of clouded in mystique, and there are these barriers with terminology and things. But once you get past that, it is a lot more approachable than people think, and you really should be empowered to take that knowledge back, because there's so much power. I mean, if we do that, then we realize that we do have so much more control over our lives than we realize, and we won't just acquiesce to these credible mandates and demands that are foisted upon us. And then in turn, we can look to the future generations and help make sure that our kids are learning how to think critically, that they're learning logic, that they're being empowered, that they're having these skills developed in them to protect themselves and to empower themselves as they grow, and then hopefully to carry that on with their children, and so on and so forth. Because we didn't get where we are just out of the last couple years. I mean, this was something that was a multi-generational thing of changing how we're educated, changing how we think about things. So how do we truly respond to that and undo that. We kind of have to almost reverse that process in a way, and really make sure we're nurturing our own children, and we're building that future foundation again in a way that promotes free thought, empowerment, knowledge, and instead of closing it off. And I mean, it's not surprising that we get to where we are when you look at kind of where we've been and how we've been shaped in such a deliberate way. And I think if we are able to step into the light and realize that, it's okay to have some fear, right? Courage is an absence of fear. It's
Right.
accepting that the fear is there, but when we're called to do something, nobody woke up one day and said, you know what, I'd really love to wear a mask or be mandated to do this or that. But it's how we respond when it's foisted upon us. I certainly didn't ask to be tossed out of my job and my career and everything, even though I was asking a lot of questions, and I'm actually quite relieved to not be there anymore. But nobody asked for that. But I think it's how we respond to that for our own sake and for our children that really is going to define all of us and determine what our future is going to be.
It's been very revealing. The response has been very revealing of the general population. Yes, that's the thing to drive home, is like, it's for the children. Be that example for your children, right? You want curiosity and questioning and critical thinking, and you don't want a yes man or a yes girl. You want critical human beings that are able to make their own decisions, have the capacity for knowledge, not told what to learn, but have the capacity to know how to learn whatever it is they want to learn. So thank you for that. Thank you for focusing on that one, because that is one of the biggest topics near and dear to my heart. It's just the future generations, the future of our children, and creating healthy, robust human beings. So thank you for your time, Mike. I really appreciate you sharing with me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everyone. Hope you enjoy that. Oh, Mike, by the way, do you have a website or anything that people can go to? Is there something that you have that for the general public, or is that, or not? Or your Telegram channel? Do you want to share any of those things?
I actually have, what is it called now? I created one of those, it's a flow code page. This is one of those things, I'm learning all this stuff kind of on the fly here, where you can put all the links to all the different sites and things. So I've created one of these for Scientists for Health Freedom that has links to all of the pages and things. So the Telegram one, where it kind of started, and then there's pages or groups, I should say, on Gab and MeWe, and then I've created video channels on a number of different platforms where I'm hoping to be able to, as I start to have discussions and stuff with people, and I've already started to kind of promote different scientists and people speaking out. So I think it's a flow code, I don't know, and then it's just Scientists for Health Freedom.
Okay, well, I'll get the link and I'll put that on the page in the notes so that people can find that.
Yeah, because that's kind of easier than trying to give you, well, this is Telegram and this is
right. Okay, we'll do that. Okay,
that would be great.
Check it out. Check his work out. If you're a scientist, if you're interested in any shape or form, check out what he's got out there, because I know there's going to be information for everyone. It's not just about the scientist community. It's all of us. We have to come together with our critical and curious minds and create the new world that we want to live in. Okay, Mike, thank you so much for your time today.